No intro, let's get on with it. Overwatch is a 6v6, or in Overwatch 2, a 5v5 first-person shooter between two teams whose success depends upon two main factors, their timing and positioning. Even Video Game Donkey simplifies the game down to this level.
Nearly every Overwatch match is decided by positioning and timing. Can your team sync up good enough to push? Can you get your flankers and your front line moving in at the same time? If not, you lose.
Timing refers to when you decide to exert pressure on the enemy team, which should be at the same time as either team pressures, and positioning refers to where you decide to exert pressure on the enemy team, which boils down to utilizing angles. I recently made a whole video breaking down timing across all the roles in Overwatch, but it's really no more complicated than timing when you do stuff with when your team does stuff. Your team essentially acts as a distraction to allow you to get away with aggressive plays, hence why timing aggression is very fundamental. Positioning can be a very complicated concept, especially for new players. Where do I go? Does my positioning change with each hero? And if so, why? What about the map that I play, or the composition that my team plays? There can be a lot of nuances with positioning, hence why a general rule of taking angles is often a good idea. The reason why angles are strong is twofold. The first is that it eliminates cover. By taking multiple angles around the team, there is no cover to utilize, because if you hide from one angle, there's going to be another one that you can rely on.
Nobody from Shock can stabilize here because of Reaper, and nobody from Shock can stabilize here because of Sombra. So you're absolutely right.
You know, they also have angles, so now they're pressuring here, forcing this D.Va to make an option of like, do I want to DM the Sombra? Do I want to DM the Reaper? Do I want to DM these guys?
The other thing that you can touch on as well, the reason why map control is good is not just because of like the vision manipulation that you're describing, but it's also because cover just doesn't exist. Like Winston can't stop taking damage here. He can't stop taking damage here. He can't stop taking damage here. There is nowhere to hide because of the angles that allow people to shoot continuously. There never is any corner.
The second reason is that it splits attention and focus. It's way easier to focus on one direction of damage compared to multiple. Anyways, on to the next level. Now onto the second level, there'll be 4 additional concepts, being sightlines, mechanics, timing, and movements. Let's deal with the first. Sightlines refer to what range you want to be playing at. For instance, on maps like Junkertown, Havana, or Rialto to a lesser extent, heroes like Hanzo, Widow, or Ashe would be preferable, whereas on maps like Lijiang Control Center, due to the short sightlines, heroes like Mei, Doom, Reaper, Reinhardt, Symmetra, and Junkrat would be best. Mechanics is also something I'd like to touch on. Whilst this definitely could be on a higher level, mechanics and settings are something you set quite early on, and warm-up routines, whether that be an Overwatch workshop code, practicing in deathmatch, or using aim trainers like Kovacs, are good habits to get onto from the onset. I recommend checking out some of IOStox's videos on aim training, and feel free to pause the video here to test out my personal settings I use on console. They will also be in the description. Next, let's build off timing a bit more. Even for a casual player, timing cooldowns, ultimates and abilities are key to maximizing your value. As I go into depth on in my timing video, this is especially key for off-tank and flex support players. A well-timed defense matrix, Zarya bubble, biotic grenade, or immortality field could swing the team fight in a matter of seconds. Lastly, let's move on to movement. IOStox made an over an hour-long video dedicated to movement, which I'll try to summarize in under 30 seconds. Movement mainly compromises of strafing, jumping, crouching, standing still, peek shooting.
It's about strafing in and out of cover to make sure that you are only exposing yourself when you absolutely have to.
And any other character-specific movements. The whole point of learning these techniques is to make your movement more elusive, meaning you're harder to hit, whilst also ensuring your aim doesn't suffer too much. Players in the metal ranks, especially in gold and below, have predictable movement that if improved upon, might lower their deaths per 10.
Don't get touchy, don't be getting nigga feelings.
Now onto the average tier, or what I'd consider competitive players who genuinely do want to improve. Here I have 5 additional concepts of peeling, the 4 positional rules, the fundamentals of each hero, and sustain, range, and mobility. Let's start off with the smallest concept of the bunch, peeling. Peeling is most simply helping out another teammate. You'll most commonly see this with heroes like D.Va, Lucio, and Brig, who can use their crowd control abilities to stun or boop enemy threats away. Here's Coach Spike detailing how to efficiently peel here.
It's very hard for the heroes who should peel for you to be an active member in the fight, while also being able to peel for you if you are far away. This creates a very awkward moment for heroes like D.Va or Brig, for example. They want to go in as well and fight and follow up on engages and brawl, but if they push up, they leave you alone, which makes you incredibly vulnerable to flankers. If they don't push up, they can help you with threats, but they're completely useless for the fight itself. If you play closer, they can deal damage, but still have the opportunity to quickly turn around and help.
Now to the 4 positional rules stolen from Natter, which is cover, lines of sight, distance from angles, and rotational options. Here's an example I use all the time on Havana's second point attack to help illustrate the 4 rules. You clearly have cover or a corner to play around, you have line of sight onto the enemy team to deal damage or land abilities, you have enough distance from angles to react to flankers, and you have some rotational options, either to retreat back to safety or to push up and be more aggressive. The next concept I want to cover is learning hero fundamentals. This is essentially the base reasoning to why you play your hero. For example, with Tracer, you play her for map control. You're one of the best duelists in the game, so if there's a DPS flanking, you can mark that DPS, and even if you don't kill them, you'll force them back main, lowering the value that they get. Luckily for all you DPS players, I cover each fundamental in my 90,000 word hero guide, which I'll link down below. For tanks and support, I'll breeze through it now. With Ana, nade aggressively, sleep defensively, unless there aren't any flankers. With Baptiste, interweave your healing and damage as much as possible and ensure good lamp timing. With Brigitte, either threaten short sightlined angles like this one on Dorado, where you can deny enemy DPS flanking, or stay relatively close to your other support to fend off threats. Make sure you are able to brawl though, referring back to Coach Spike's clip. With Lucio, spin your team in or out of fights, using your wall ride, boop and gun to dual DPS or threaten off-angle pressure like on King's or third point attack. Optimize your damage boost by damage boosting those who are aggressing. For instance, a Reinhardt 5 strike, a Roadhog hook, a Zenyatta 5 orb, or Ash Dynamite. With Moira, either flank like your Nolan Corona or farm Coalescence as fast as possible, timing your heal orb with when your tanks engage. With Zenyatta, Discord and Harmony orb your flankers. That's it. With D.Va, just mark off angles. With Reinhardt, close the distance, play corners, shield on rotations, and clear high ground for your DPS. With Roadhog, just flank and land hooks. With Sigma, you specialise in taking ranged, angled pressure, save your accretion if you get dove, and use your shield when necessary. With Winston, zap enemy squishies when your team can follow up, saving your jump to escape and your bubble to sustain. With Wrecking Ball, either duel enemy DPS or supports, or disrupt the enemy team by rolling through them. With Zarya, bubble aggression from your teammates and enforce your own pressure using your personal bubble as a failsafe. I've skipped Arisa due to her rework, but she'll get her own guide when Overwatch 2 drops. Let's move on to the final concept of sustain versus range versus mobility. This is what dictates the kind of composition your team will be running, and I have mentioned this in previous videos, but I highly recommend checking out Coach Spike's Frontline vs Angles video, which breaks down this quite well and explains how to play certain comps against each other. I'll play a short clip of it here.
So people with low range give you a strong frontline, mobile people mostly play for angles, and ranged people are in between. Both teams can play aggressively and defensively, either denying or taking angles, either running it down or disrupting.
Listening, you're not listening. I said it with my chest and I don't care who I offend.
Now onto the penultimate level aimed at the top percentiles in ranked and or competitive players and teams. Here we have yet another 4 additional concepts of tempo, kill boxes, mentality, and the half-second rule. Dealing with the first concept, tempo is often misunderstood. Tempo is just the rate at which you use resources. Therefore, a fast tempo is when you use resources in a short period of time, and vice versa. Here's Gaming with Boosh explaining tempo across 3 main compositions.
Dive heroes are very cyclical in nature. They quickly engage with their resources, get value, and disengage. In a dive team composition, Winston will engage at the same time as his other teammates in order to maximize their power and effectiveness. Dive comps play at a very slow tempo before a dive, and a very fast tempo during the dive, and again a very slow tempo after a dive. Poke spam heroes are not cyclical at all in nature. Poke comps play at a constant tempo over the course of a fight. The longer that a fight goes on, the more of an advantage Poke will have over the other team comps. Brawl heroes are somewhere in between. Their kits are between weapon and ability based. They are somewhat cyclical, with medium abilities and weapons, and long cooldowns. Brawl comps' power over time will look something like this, which shows that Brawl comps start out at a fast tempo that slows down over time.
I highly recommend you check out Booster's video. Not only is the advice sound, but the editing is great. To clarify tempo a bit further, Here's Sparlow giving an example of a dive composition in Overwatch 2 playing slow.
It's too simplistic to say that this composition just needs to go in right now. What they could do, we're going to take an angle here with our Tracer, and then our Winston's going to play underneath, and then our Reaper's going to play up in here, so our Ana's going to be looking for an angle here, and our Lucifer's going to be looking for Boop. So they could play it slow, but just as long as they're not getting shot too much. So they can play it slow, avoiding damage, scouting for maybe they force a cooldown on this, or maybe Punk just messes up and bubbles this, or maybe Crimzo gets shot a couple times by Krillin and then has to nade himself. That's the kind of thing that you're looking for, but you don't have to be engaged all the way to go. You don't have to dive. We have to dive now. No, when you do commit, you commit hard, but you're waiting for and looking for opportunities for you to commit hard on.
To build off what Sparlow says, why would you even want to play a slower tempo in the first place? Well, there's a few reasons. First off, it can burn more time off the clock if you're defending. Secondly, you can allow the enemy team to walk into your own kill box. In the example Sparlow gives of the dive comp playing slow, a kill box would likely be somewhere on the high ground where you play slow, so the Zarya comp can actually walk into the kill box. This provides a nice transition into kill boxes themselves. Kill boxes are just areas of the map that you make lethal once the enemy team walk through them. Sparlow's already got a great video detailing kill boxes in a variety of comps, so here's an example on Busan. And also note how the Sombra positions, again referring all the way back to the start where you have an angle. Next, moving on to the half-second rule. This was also in my timing video, but I think it's absolutely vital that people know this information. Sparlow describes it here, and I'll try to give an example afterwards.
Timing needs to be with your tanks, but I would say half a second after your tanks. If I'm playing Tracer and dive and I'm trying to one-clip that Zen, I'm gonna go in right as my Winston's landing, half a second, and then now I'm going, because now that Zenyatta is fully focused on annihilating and beating up that Winston. He's not thinking about anything else. Okay, you're a pickpocket, right? Can you imagine how effective a pickpocket would be at like a fireworks show? There's a big firework, boom, right?
Lord Jesus, oh shit!
And that's when you reach in. They're not thinking at all what's going on behind them, right? That's a terrible analogy, but you get the idea.
Sparlow mentioned a Tracer Winston example, which can be shown on Numbani. Your Winston jumps on backline, and because their Ana is only looking at the Winston, you can easily get a one clip on the Ana. The last concept I'll touch on is mentality. This is actually a really overlooked aspect of not just Overwatch, but in games in general. I made an entire 10-minute video on this, and I think it's one of my best videos to date, but I think the most important concept in that video is to do what others don't.
That he's always glad when something is difficult, because that means most people won't ever do it.
When I came to that realization, that was one of the most enlightening experiences of my life. That is one of the most important sentences you guys are ever going to hear. For Overwatch, the first tier are people who only press F1 and they read through what their abilities do, and then they play. Tier 2 are the people who go on YouTube and then they end up watching like the Angry Llama or something, or your Overwatch. Tier 3 are the people who have understood that there are better content creators, and Tier 3 are the people who belong to the 133,000 people who have watched IOSDEX's complete Bronze to Owl guide. And then we get to the absolute top tier, people who review their own VODs. And when you hear that absolutely no one reviews their own VODs, you should like froth at the mouth. Saliva should exit your mouth. So nobody really wants to VOD review, and you need to take that opportunity.
More recently, reframing your mindset onto true SR, as IOSDEX describes in his own video, is key for long-term success. True SR is just the highest SR rating you yourself would accept a boosting request of, because it shows that you can comfortably play to that level.
Just because you got 3400 SR on a nice win streak doesn't mean that you are willing to bet $500 on being able to get an account to that rating. And if you aren't willing to bet that, then 3400 SR simply isn't your true SR. If I asked you to get a fresh account to 2900 SR, however, you wouldn't hesitate, because you know that you can get there no problem.
SVB also has a notoriously great video on keeping a stable mental and ranked.
You are not the toughest or baddest, my pet is the maddest. I probably any careers and it's never right, I'm honest.
Now to the final level with the most amount of additional concepts. Let's deal with awareness first, which is essentially acknowledging your surroundings and not tunnel visioning into what's in front of you.
So again, to talk about players' awareness, it was pretty rare to find players who are preemptively looking for Doomfist. A lot of the players react to what's in front of them rather than choosing to help backline dealing with Doomfist. Their vision seems to be fixated. It's almost like a one-way street, as if they have this cast on their neck when they have like neck disc or something. They can't look back, you know?
Awareness is especially important for flex support players when playing against flankers, making sure to anticipate threats rather than reacting to them.
Don't react, anticipate. It's about finding that balance between putting in damage, like whatever your team is shooting, and then instantly anticipating this tracer ball is coming. I'm gonna turn my attention away from what I'm shooting at to check my flank. I remember back in the day, I remember when Alarm was like in contenders, and one of the things that tracers would always say that made Alarm great wasn't just his mechanics, but he seemed to always know the timing of when that flank was coming. Like he always had that right click ready to the launch, and and he wouldn't always get the kill necessarily, but you'd force the blinks, he'd hit one shot and force the recall early, and it just scuffed things up.
Scouting also comes under awareness, as you're trying to be aware of where the enemy team is coming from.
You can fly like the top right window and then fly above that so you can see like where they're coming from. Because if they go high grounds, then maybe we back up from like the closest corner, whereas if they're going down main, then we can hold that corner really close.
So you're basically consistently as D.Va pre-fight whenever possible looking to scout, flash a matrix so you don't get chunked down. I think be very careful that you don't get slept here. That would be really unfortunate. Yeah. But yeah, basically like you're looking to scout just so your team can use that information. And honestly, even if your team can't, you can use it.
There's also 3 tips you can use to help boost your awareness. The first is to look around when you're reloading or you are in between shots.
Where you're sort of like looking like this, you shoot and you look in another direction, right? He's checking main. Take this even a step further, right? Is like you can go further out. You don't have to just like do short thing. You have time. You can go further out. You can even look the other way too. You can be a bit more open, right?
The second is to look around when your team is stabilizing. For instance, say you just survived the dive and are trying to stabilize. Now you can look around to see any threats that you can deal with or capitalize on. The third is to look at the kill feed. A simple but underutilized tip. The kill feed can give you information on whether to play more aggressively or more defensively, which leads me nicely onto the next concept of defensive concaves. This is based on a recent video from Temporal, giving a third option on how to win a losing teamfight.
What if we backed up our BAP over here, sent our Junkrat up here, pulled our Cassidy back over to here, and then put our Lucio where we need to? This is a kill box that we've just created. And if the opponents have to pass through the kill box to get to our BAP, that's gonna work pretty well for us. We get to fire in from some pretty extreme angles. If they tried to push this Cassidy falls back, and we can actually reform our concave. It's not always this clean, but you can continue to readjust and really not let this team have a fantastic or easy time with their cleanup there.
The first 2 options, for those who don't know, is to retreat fully, which gives up a lot of map control, or to trade out kills. For instance, if you're playing a Reinhardt mirror and your Reinhardt blows up, you might want to trade back on the enemy Reinhardt as fast as possible, as in a 5v6 or 4v5, you'll lose the war of attrition, and their team is probably low on resources if your Reinhardt goes down. Next, I'll move on to Micro. Micro just refers to optimizing the hero's kit to suit the hero fundamental covered in level 3. For instance, this could be using terrain on Tracer to save yourself blinks, or deciding which of your cooldowns as Brigitte should be used on enemy flankers.
Try and save your flail for flankers and use your Bashon ball. Ball you want to keep in your team because you can punish. Flailing ball away is like not as useful because inherently help is uptime. Flailing flankers is better because you force resources.
I recommend checking out Sword's hero guides where he breaks down the kit of each hero backed with some pro gameplay. Now onto the last 3 concepts, with one of the most important ones here being mindset. Don't confuse this with mentality covered in the previous level, as this has to do with analysing gameplay for improvements. The foundation for this comes from 3 different factors, which funnily enough is the acronym COME. The C stands for compositions, as I've already touched upon with Coach Spike. The U stands for ultimates and how they change your approach to a teamfight. And the M stands for the map that you're playing on and how the geometry changes your positioning. Here's an example Cat gives, breaking down each part of the acronym.
Shanghai have a comp that relies on taking alternate angles and burning their enemy down with range spam, to the point where they can push in and engage to clean up the fight. Atlanta, on the other hand, are playing a fairly standard rush comp. They want to look to speed boost around the map and try to catch enemies, or get into a position where they can use the objective to force the enemy into a brawl. We can imagine that Shanghai will push up and spam Atlanta to build ults, then continue to fall back and kite out until they have those ults to re-engage with. Atlanta also know that they need to contest the cart around the bookstore to have a chance at a second retake fight towards the end of streets.
Moving on to the penultimate concept in this video, ebb and flow, which can also mean push and pull. A great example can be seen with the current Junker Queen meta in the Overwatch League. The Houston Outlaws push with Rally and Bob, and the London Spitfire pull back using Rally. The Spitfire then push with Overclock, and the Outlaws push back with their own Rampage. The ebb and flow has now ended, and a full-on brawl has ensued, where the Outlaws use Blade and Beat, and the Spitfire only use Beat to respond. Here's a quick graphic showing how the push and pull cycle looks like, all the way from the Bob and Rally from the Outlaws to their Blade and Beat. If you're wondering why Outlaws still lost this fight, despite investing all their ultimates, they should not have stacked their Bob or Rally, and for some reason, the Outlaws use Beats. If the Outlaws traded their ultimates a bit more effectively, they could have easily won this fight and snowballed it into a full cap. The final concept I'll move on to is communication. The golden rule with communication is that calls imply action. If you say that Zarya has Grav, that information implies that you will do something about it. For instance, countering with your own ultimate, focusing down the Zarya, playing splits so the Zarya only grabs a single person, etc. I recommend watching Nata's video on dynamic comms for more information. Well, that's the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe, comment and like, and if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.